Today I'm going to be talking about Jane Austen by way of a little bit of biographical information before we get started with Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen is probably the most significant, the most important female writer. Well, maybe I digress. But one of the most important female writers in all of English literature. And her books are read by people all over the world. Her works have been made into countless TV shows and films and theater and radio adaptations. And she only wrote 6 novels in her lifetime. When we look at some of the other authors that we've taken a look at already, and their canon of their work is so large, for a woman to write 6 novels and still have so much power and like relatability, even still, like 200 years later, like she is still, her books are still so relevant. And so we're going to take a look then at a little bit about her background information. For me, what really stands out is she's actually very funny. Like the comedy that she writes is very dry, but it's there. It packs a nice punch. She did a lot of important social commentary on the social statuses and the status of women specifically. She was an early feminist. She's a literary genius. Pioneered new writing techniques, and she was very ambitious with what she was putting out. So let's take a look real quick at her life, and then we'll get started reading Pride and Prejudice. So only a few of Jane Austen's manuscripts remain in existence. The majority of her works, her correspondence, her letters, was either burned or heavily edited by her sister Cassandra right before she died. As a result, the things that we know about her are very sparse. Like the details, they're very rare and inconsistent. What we do know is that she was a woman of stature. She had humor. She was keenly intelligent. And then her family remembers her as a kind of almost like a saint, the fact that she lived her life that way. But critics often say that she was a lot sharper than her family wished the public to think. So there's always kind of a big mystery why a lot of her stuff was burned before she died. So she grew up in a tight-knit family. She was the 7th of 8 children with 6 brothers and 1 sister. Her parents, George Austen and Cassandra Lee, her father was a minister. They married in 1764. He was an orphan, but he had a wealthy uncle who helped him paid for him to attend school, and he was ordained by the Church of England, and that elevated his social standing. His rich uncle and his association with the Church of England put him up into a social bracket that would make him a good match for his wife, whose family was considered at that time of like higher social status. So in 1765, they moved to Steventon, which is where Jane was born. It's North Hampshire. It's about 60 miles southwest of London. There he took on the position of a rector at a parish church. So she had we talked about her large family. All of her family, for the most part, all had successful careers of their own. 2 of her brothers were ordained ministers. One of her brothers was her agent and wrote a biography after she died. They had one brother who was born mentally deficient. His name was George, and he spent the majority of his life in and out of institutions. One of their brothers was adopted by a wealthy relative, a wealthy cousin, and he would inherit a large estate in Chawton, which is where Jane ended up at the end of her life, writing most of her novels, where she would complete most of her novels. She had 2 younger brothers, Francis and Charles, and they were both admirals in the Navy, highly decorated military men. Her sister Cassandra was they were the only two girls, so they were really close, and it's really through, and they had a great relationship, and she relied very heavily on her sister, and her sister had a lot of influence over Jane as well. And it's really through the letters that Jane wrote to Cassandra that scholars have been able, and biographers have been able to get a hold of, that we're able to kind of piece the rest of her life together. When she was 7, she was sent to school at Oxford. Her and Cassandra were sent to school. The girls caught typhus while they were there, and they were brought back to Steventon. When she was 9, she attended the Abbey School of Reading. But right after they enrolled, their father could no longer afford the tuition there, so they were brought home, and they were largely brought up. Their education was at home, which I talk about this in the importance of marriage and the social standing of women in another lecture that I did in this unit. For women, their education wasn't really academic based. It was all based on being accomplished, right? How do I make you the best possible wife to entertain your guests? Well, I'm going to teach you how to speak a few little romantic languages, like modern languages like French and Italian. I'm going to teach you how to play an instrument like the harp, the piano, the pianoforte, the harpsichord. I'm going to teach you how to dance and draw and sing, and in general, just be accomplished. And it would be those accomplishments that would help you find a man that was make you worth marrying, right? So it wasn't really an education what they learned at home. Now they could read, and I talk about that as well. They learn a lot on their own from reading. So her only formal schooling, after she was like 10, she didn't have anything formal past that. They read aloud to each other. They were a very artistic family. They liked to put on plays in their barn, and neighbors would come and watch them. She was writing as early, we think by age 12. She was writing and publishing poems and parodies. So when she was 20 years old, she won the attention of a wealthy young Irish gentleman. His name was Tom Lefroy. And she was funny, and she was quick at wit, and she was pretty. She had curly brown hair and sparkling eyes, is what she was described as. And she won this guy's attention, and his family found out about it. And they both kind of fell in with each other and wanted to pursue a relationship. But his family found out about it, and she was considered unsuitable because she didn't have any money. And so they separated them. And he moved away. He would later marry an heiress and become a prominent political figure in Ireland. In 1795, when she was 20, she started penning letters, a novel in letters, and they were Eleanor and Marianne. That was the name of the novel that she was writing in letters, in correspondence, which would eventually be reworked later on to become Sense and Sensibility. She also did that with First Impressions, which was rejected by a publisher in 1797, but it would later go on to become Pride and Prejudice when she reworked it and and published it. So they lived in Steventon until 1801. The father decided to move them to Bath. Bath was a resort town for the wealthy, but it was also full of many social climbers and gossips. And so it was hard for her there. It was difficult for her to live there because the social demands, everybody always wanted to entertain, and so she was always being thrown into all these circles, and that was kind of really exhausting to her to have to do, to be social and that kind of thing. So a family friend, his name was Harris Bigwither. He was loaded. He had so much money, and he proposed to her, and she accepted. She got to thinking about it that night at home and was like, yeah, I really don't love him. I don't really want to marry somebody for love, which again, that was not even a consideration. Love, wasn't really on the table. It was who could give you the most secure financial future, and I go over that in Money and the Importance of Marriage and the other 2 lectures, so make sure you check those out for me to make that a little bit more clear. So she her father died in 1805, and that left Jane, Cassandra, and their mother without enough money to live comfortably. Luckily, they had a brother who had inherited some land and property, and they moved to Charlton with Edward, her brother. They lived in a little cottage on the estate that their brother Edward owned, the Knight estate. And that was probably where she spent the most productive period of her writing life. She published several books: Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, Emma. She was starting to gain some recognition by 1814 for her writing, but neither Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice were published under her name. They were under a false name. She began showing signs of an illness when she was working on Persuasion, which was her last completed novel. She also had another novel in the works that was called Sandition. It never got finished, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a little bit. So she's starting to get sick. Scholars think it was Addison's disease, which is like fever, back pain, nausea, irregular skin pigmentation, and it eventually leads to death. So she died at age 41 on July the 18th, 1817, with her sister Cassandra at her side, and both Northanger Abbey and Persuasion were published after her death. Okay, so a little bit about her popularity, her enduring popularity, really, and why she's still so relevant today. So, although this world is very remote to us today, in today's time, the world that she lived in and the world that she wrote about, her characters have experiences and emotions that are really familiar to us, and this is why she's still so relevant. They misjudge people based on appearances. They're embarrassed by their parents. They flirt. They fall in love. Her characters face social restrictions that have been translated into many popular films, like Clueless, the California high school girl that's misunderstood. So there are 9 adaptations in film of Pride and Prejudice, and in recent years there have been adaptations of both Emma and Persuasion. I think both Emma may be on Netflix now, the newest one, and Persuasion I know is like on Amazon Prime, and so like they continue to revamp these films. Bridget Jones' Diary is a spinoff of Austen's work. And so there are so many things that are still so relevant in her popularity. So Eudora Welty once wrote that Austen's novels withstand time because they pertain not to the outside world, but to the interior, to what goes on perpetually in the mind and the heart. And that's why her work will continue to fascinate, entertain, and inspire us.